Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on post notifications so you will not miss a future video.
Welcome to the channel, TheTechPianoPlayerKid.
A black background with white text that reads TheTechPianoPlayerKid displays on the screen with the same text written to the right in Braille. What is up, everyone? The TechPianoPlayerKid here, and welcome to Part 3 of Chapter 13 in Timecrest 3. And we just left off where Luthor appeared and was going to talk to Scarlet about the pocket watch. And Scarlet is a little bit... It's kind of hard to explain. It's like she went through a lot. So she's a little bit nervous, a little bit taken aback. Like, just like, well, okay, this is weird. I don't know what to think about this because I've heard bad things about you and I don't know what to do. And people say the watch is cursed and you say it's not in some ways and all that stuff. So we left off where Scarlet's on the inside and Luthor's on the outside, on the other side of the door. And, she will talk to him, seems like, but she's just a little nervous and she just wants to talk from the inside. And Luthor seems pretty cool with that. And then we also, found out in the previous video that Scarlet got not depromoted, but she didn't get promoted because of her blindness, which I think is an absolutely ridiculous reason because you shouldn't attack someone just because if they have a disability or not, because, it's just not cool. People can, whether you have one or not, you should have the ability to have a promotion, if that makes up, or a raise, whatever you call it. Anyway, let's get on with the video and let's jump into part 3 of chapter 13 in Timecrest 3.
Close to the sun.
Description: Scarlet sighed as she continued to press her back against the door from the outside. I'm not talking to anyone. I'm just mumbling to myself. Description.
Okay, where was I?
Luthor said, I heard you say. Description. He said, was the voice in your head trying? Description. Luthor said, if the voice in your head is telling you something about me, then I think you should trust in what was said. Why would you say that? What if the description? Luthor said, I believe the person that the voice belongs to is trying to help us. Can you hear the voice? Description. Luthor said, I used to. Description. Luthor said, listen, Scarlet, I can tell you what's going on with the pocket watch. Description. Luthor said, I'll go away after I explain everything I know to you. Description. Luthor said, does that sound good to you, Scarlet? Description. Scarlet swallowed hard. Description. She squeezed her hands together, one hand squeezing around the pocket watch. I'm sorry, Luthor. I'm sorry I tried to kill you even when you You must think I'm a horrible, and I accept that, but I am so very... Description. Luthor said, is that what's bothering you? I don't blame you at all for what happened. In fact, I'm sorry that I hurt you and your brother during the trials. Description. Scarlet stopped leaning against the door. She turned around and faced it. Description. An expression of surprise, followed by relief crossed her face. Are you saying, ellipsis, you don't hate me, Luthor? Description. Luthor said, I don't, Scarlet. Description. Scarlet's eyes got wet. She blinked back the tears and smiled, the tension in her body relaxing as she heard Luthor's words. What about your mother? Your mom was so nice to me when she was my teacher and I never meant to repay her kindness by trying to hurt you. Description. Luthor is silent for a moment. He said, my mom is a different story. She's still hanging on to her resentment for you. Description. Scarlet swallowed hard, tension returning to her body. Description. Luthor said, I reminded her that I was the one who chose to participate in those trials. I put my own life in danger, but I can't change my mom's mind. I'm sorry, Scarlet. But Description. Scarlet took a deep breath. Thank you, Luthor. And, ellipsis, I understand why your mom feels the way she does. I deserve it. I really do.
Okay.
Description. Scarlet paused.
Here you are.
I'll listen to what you have to say, Luthor, ellipsis, about the pocket watch. Description. Scarlet felt herself tearing up again. But can we talk through the door? At least for a bit, ellipsis. Description. Luthor said, of course. Also, I'm willing to listen to you, ellipsis. But I don't guarantee that I'll believe you, Luthor. You told me not to close the watch. But I already spoke to somebody who told me the exact opposite. I just wanted to let you know so you don't feel like you wasted your time on me afterwards. Description. Luthor said, did Keturah pay you a visit? Description. Scarlet looks surprised. You know about Keturah? Description. Luthor said, yeah. She tried to take the watch from me before. Description. Luthor said, since you have the watch now, I figured she might come to you too. Description. Luthor said, what did she say to you, Scarlet? She told me to stay away from you. And that this watch will lead to unhappiness for me. Description, Luthor paused. He said, I'm sorry, Scarlet. You're in this mess because of me, so I promise to get you out of it. Description, Scarlet paused. Description, Luthor paused. He said, I'm sorry.
Ah!
Description, Scarlet paused. Dude,
There we go.
this is getting complicated. Description, Scarlet paused. She felt the pocket watch in her hand. But I do want to hear what you have to say about the watch. Is the watch bad news, Luthor? Is it dangerous? Because I've been hearing this voice in my head, ellipsis, and I don't know what to believe anymore. Description, Luthor said, it's not a simple answer. Description, Scarlet gulped. Description, Luthor said, but I can tell you that the voice you've been hearing in your head is not here to hurt you. If the voice you have been hearing is who I think it is. System message, Scarlet is waiting. I don't know if hearing this from me is going to make you do the opposite, but I hope you can trust Luthor. 1 of 5 response. Can you tell Luthor that I miss him, Scarlet? Please, can you tell Luthor that it's about time he found the watch, Scarlet? 3 of 5. I told you Luthor wasn't angry at you. 4 of 5. Can you tell Luthor that I miss him, Scarlet? Can you tell Luthor that I miss him, Scarlet? Please tell Luthor that I was worried about him after all the things Alvin said to him. 2 of 5 responses. Button. I don't know if hearing this from me is going to make you do the opposite, but I hope you can trust Luthor. 1 of 5 responses. I don't know if hearing this from me is going to make you do the opposite, but I hope you can trust Luthor. Response. Description, Scarlet heard your message. Not now, please, ellipsis. Description, Scarlet pressed her hand on the lid of the watch. She started to close the watch. Description, Luthor said, Scarlet, can you keep the watch open and tell me what the voice in your head says? Description, Scarlet paused. She furrowed her brows. You want me to repeat back to you what the voice in my head says?
Yes.
Description, Luthor said, I know it seems like a weird request, but it's important to me to know if the voice in your head is saying something. Yeah, it's kind of a weird request. Patora said the voice in my head belongs to Chronos Timecrest and that he's a bad man. Can you at least tell me why you're so interested in what the voice says? Description, Luthor said, the voice you have been hearing should belong to your counterpart, a human from the human world. Description, Scarlet gasped. Description, Luthor paused. He said, this human, your counterpart, was once my counterpart. Description, he said, I didn't come here today just to talk to you. Description, Luthor said, I want to speak with your counterpart, but I need your help to do that, Scarlet.
Okay.
Description, Scarlet swallowed hard. I thought the voice could belong to a person, but my brother told me it was impossible. Impossible. But Pator says the voice belongs to Chronos. And now you're saying it belongs to someone else. Description, Luthor didn't say anything for a moment. Description, Luthor said, sadly, Chronos is also on the other side of the watch, along with your counterpart. Description, Luthor said, but if I'm right, then the voice you've been hearing should be your counterpart's and not Chronos. Your counterpart is not here to hurt you. Description, Luthor said, in fact, I'm alive thanks to your counterpart. Description, Scarlet gulped. I'm so very confused. Description, she closed the watch. System message, connection 58 minutes for skip timer for 1 skip crystal. You have 3 skip crystals remaining. Timer for 1 skip crystal.
Well.
Description, Luthor is standing near the window closest to the door in the armor room, holding the pocket watch in his hand and looking out the window. Description, Scarlet is quietly sitting on her stool by the table, with a troubled expression on her face. She has description, Scarlet is quietly sitting on her stool by the table, with a troubled expression on her face. She has a stack of name tags in her hand with writing carved into them. Description, the name tag on the top of the stack Scarlet held in her hands has the words, different timelines. Past, original past, future, now.
I don't know what that means.
Description, more name tags with notes carved on them are stacked on the table. Description, Scarlet already changed back to her work uniform of gray overalls and shirt. Description, the room is silent. Luthor, description, the room is silent. Luthor looked over at Scarlet and said, how are you doing, Scarlet? Description, Scarlet snapped out of her daze. Ellipsis. Yeah, ellipsis, sorry. I've just been sitting here quietly, haven't I? Sorry, ellipsis. Description, Luthor said, it's okay. Everything I told you, if you believe me, must be very shocking to say the very least. Description, Scarlet shook her head and inhaled deeply. Shocking and just so, ellipsis, I don't know, ellipsis, a human from the human world changed the past in our world and made me a Timecrest? I'm now linked to Chronos Timecrest, whose real name is Alvin. And Alvin is the first human that ever came to Alincia. I don't even, ellipsis, I'm sorry. I feel very slow right now, ellipsis. I hope you don't have to go soon, Luthor. Description, Luthor said, take your time. I'll keep an eye out for Valdorian guards and your brother in the meantime. Description, Scarlet swallowed hard. Thank you, ellipsis. Description, the door and windows of the armor room are all shut right now. Luthor looked away from Scarlet and out of the window by the door again. Description, Scarlet went back to looking dazed. The room fell silent for a while. Why was I chosen to be a Timecrest? Description, Luthor didn't reply immediately. After a moment, he said, I don't know. Your counterpart didn't know that choosing you would change you into a Timecrest. And description, Luthor said, and Alvin doesn't seem to know why you were chosen either. Description, Scarlet furrowed her brows. What's going on then? Why me? I don't even have any human blood in me and we barely know each other, Luthor. Description, Luthor sighed. He said, I don't believe in fate, but at this point, maybe fate is what it comes down to. Description, Scarlet paused. She took a deep breath. Are you okay, Luthor? You haven't told me much about how you've been since you woke up in this timeline. Description, Luthor looked out the window. He ran his thumb over the surface of the pocket watch. Description, Luthor said, I don't remember the last 6 years, Scarlet. Description, Scarlet looks surprised. What do you mean? Description, Luthor said, I was 13 when I spoke to Alvin. Now I'm 19 in this timeline and I remember nothing that happened in between.
Wait. Hold on. So Luthor was 29. This is... If I'm correct, if Luthor was 29 or 26, whatever, when he was talking to Riley, and now he's 9... This is weird.
Description, Scarlet gasped. Wow, ellipsis. Description, one of Scarlet's hands rubbed the other. That's crazy. You don't remember anything from the last 6 years? What could have caused your memory loss? Description, Luthor shook his head and said, I don't know. Either Alvin did something to my memories or maybe it's a side effect of what happened. Description, Scarlet let everything sink in for a moment. What did your mom say when you told her all of this? Description, Luthor said, I didn't tell her. You're the first person I told about what's truly going on with me. Really? But wouldn't your mom notice? Ellipsis, something was off? Description, Luthor said, my mom's memory of the last 6 years with me seems intact, so it's been a challenge pretending everything is normal to my parents. Description, Luthor said, especially when they make references to something I don't remember from the last 6 years. Description, Luthor said, but it's either that or the truth. And the truth will only lead to endless questions from them which I'm not ready to deal with yet. Description, Luthor paused. He said, it's funny, but my parents actually want to change their last name back to Reed.
That is weird.
Description, Scarlet looks surprised. Do you think it has something to do with what Alvin did to you? Description, Luthor shook his head. He said, no, I think it's just a coincidence. She wanted to support me, but my mom was never fond of the pocket watch or my obsession with Chrono's Timecrest. Description, Luthor said, I think she just prefers to be a Reed again. I just think it's very ironic timing is all. Description, Scarlet let everything sink in again. Luthor, ellipsis, even though you look 19, you are actually your 13-year-old self?
Wait.
Luthor, ellipsis, even though you look 19, you are actually your 13-year-old self? Description, Luthor said, yeah. Description, Scarlet cringed. So, ellipsis, the Valdorian trials we fought in were pretty recent for you, ellipsis, right? Description, Luthor looked at Scarlet. She had worry all over her face. Description, Luthor said, yeah, it hasn't been that long since the trials for me, but I hope you can believe me when I say I don't blame you for anything that happened during our fight. Description, Scarlet sat quietly for a moment before nodding with a small smile. Thank you, Luthor. Hearing you say that makes me feel so much lighter. Description, Scarlet paused again, her smile fading. You told me that Alvin said a new past was created where I'm a Timecrest. But if you're older, then doesn't it mean this is your future and not your past? Description, Luthor said, Alvin and my counterpart. Description, Luthor shook his head and cleared his throat. Description, Luthor said, and your counterparts are from the future.
This is... Even though I think I played this once, it's still confusing.
Description, Scarlet inhaled deeply as Luthor said your counterpart. Description, Luthor said, to Alvin and your counterpart, the timeline we are living now is the past, even though it's my future and your present. Description, Scarlet touched the top name tag that has the words, different timelines, past, original past, future, now, carved into it. Right, ellipsis, you told me that. Sorry, it's taking me some time to absorb everything. Description, Scarlet's expression is mixed with awe and fear. Time traveling is real. Wow, ellipsis. My counterpart is actually from the future, ellipsis, wow. Time traveling is just so, ellipsis, wow. And it's messy, ellipsis, so it seems. Can you list out all the timelines again, Luthor? Description, Luthor said, of course. Oh, sorry. Hang on. I need to write down more details this time. Description, Scarlet placed the stack of name tags that she had been holding on the table before picking up fresh empty ones. Incendiatos Magnus, precision point. Description, Scarlet's finger began to glow. Okay, go ahead. Description, Luthor nodded. He said, from my understanding, there are 4 major timelines. Description, Luthor said, first, there's the future timeline where Alvin and your counterparts are from. Description, Scarlet card. Future equals Alvin and counterpart, into the name tag. Description, Luthor said. Second, there's the timeline when I'm 13 years old, where I'm from. Description, Scarlet continued to take notes. Description, he said. Third, there's the timeline of the original past that has now been erased and replaced by this timeline. Description, Luthor said. And fourth, there's this timeline that we're currently living in.
Oh.
Description, Scarlet finished carving her notes into the name tags. Oh, wow, Luthor, you seem to understand all this complicated stuff. Description, Luthor said. It's all I think about. Description, Luthor said. Alvin's words are on repeat in my mind and it's very annoying to keep thinking about someone I hate so often. Do you know what happened in the original past? Ellipsis, the timeline that got erased and replaced with this one? Description, Luthor said. Alvin did have memories of the original past since he's from the future, but he claimed his memories of the original past were getting erased as this new past was forming. Description, Luthor said. The only things he let on about the original past was that I was a Timecrest and that I became the master of wind and earth. Description, Scarlet gasped. You became the master of 2 elements? I've never heard of someone holding the title of master for 2 elements. That's amazing, Luthor. Description, Luthor looked at the walls of the quarantine zone outside the window. He said, and Alvin said there were no quarantine zones in the original past. Description, Scarlet's mouth dropped a little. No quarantine zones? Praise the first, that sounds so good. Description, Luthor said. That timeline is gone now. Who knows what's going to happen going forward? Oh, right, ellipsis. Description, Scarlet reached for an empty name tag and carved Luthor as master of 2 elements and no quarantine zones in original past. Description, Luthor shrugged. He sighed and said, and who knows if Alvin is even telling the truth about the original past? Description, Luthor muttered under his breath, who knows? Description, she turned around to add the new notes she had taken onto the stack on the table. When she did, the stack tumbled over into a pile. Description, Scarlet pursed her lips, her expression troubled, as she put her hands on top of the messy pile of notes. Description, Luthor looked down at the pocket watch in his hand. Read it. Description, after a moment, Luthor said, I opened the pocket watch, Scarlet. Description, Scarlet looks alarmed as she turned her attention back to Luthor. You opened the pocket watch? But you said the watch can even sense surroundings, so aren't you afraid that Alvin's watching and listening in on us? Description, Luthor said, who knows? He could be. He probably is. Description, Luthor said, but this pocket watch is also the only way to communicate to your counterpart, so it's worth the risk to me. Description, Luthor paused. He said, I'm just... Description, Luthor paused. He said, Scarlet, I would like your help in letting me know if your counterpart says anything, but I understand if you don't want to. I'm just... ellipsis, a little, ellipsis. I feel nervous with the watch open. Description, Luthor nodded. He said, I know. I shouldn't have opened the pocket watch, but I was hoping the 3 of us can talk together. Description, Luthor said, but let me leave the room. Just give me a few minutes to talk to your counterpart outside and I'll close the watch. Description, Luthor opened the door to the armor room. Description, Scarlet furrowed her brows. After a moment, she took a deep breath. Wait, you don't have to leave. Please stay. Description, Scarlet blushed at her own words. I mean, ellipsis, I would like it if you stayed and included me in the conversation you had with your, ellipsis, my counterpart, Luthor. It's been strange for me ever since the watch appeared. And I'm glad to finally have someone who knows what I'm going through, so, ellipsis. Description, Scarlet's voice trailed off. Description, Luthor smiled. He said, that's how I felt when I first started talking to your counterpart.
Excuse me.
Description, Luthor said, you're not alone anymore, Scarlet. I'm in this description, Luthor said, you're not alone anymore, Scarlet. I'm in this with you and you'll always be included if you want to be. Description, the troubled expression faded from Scarlet's face. She smiled, looking hopeful. System message, Scarlet, I'm in with you and Luthor on this too, Scarlet. 1 of 5 response. I'm sorry I got you involved in all of this. I didn't mean to turn you into a Timecrest, but I'm glad we met. 2 of 5. Scarlet, can you please tell Luthor that I'm glad to see he's okay? 3 of... So Luthor doesn't remember the last 6 years. 4 of 5. Hey, Scarlet, now that you know everything I'm hoping you will keep the watch open more often. I like to be included in things too. 5. System mess. I'm in with you and Luthor on this too, Scarlet. 1 of 5 response. I'm in with you and Luthor on this too, Scarlet. 1 of 5 responses. Button. I'm in with you and Luthor on this too. Responded. Description, Scarlet heard your message. She took description, Scarlet heard your message. She took a deep breath. Luthor, my counterpart said something just now. Description, Luthor looked down at the pocket watch. He said, description, Luthor looked down at the pocket watch. He said, what did your counterpart say, Scarlet? My counterpart said I'm in this with you and Luthor. Description, Luthor looked down at the pocket watch in his hand and smiled. Description, he said, it's good to know you're still here with us. Description, he smiled and looked at Scarlet. He said, description, he smiled and looked at Scarlet. He said, you're definitely not alone in this, Scarlet. Both of us are here with you. Description, Scarlet smiled a little and nodded. Description, Luthor looked down at the pocket watch. Description, he said, how have you been? Are you okay? System message. I'm good. I've been having a lot of fun learning more about Scarlet. 1 of 6 respond. I'm good, but I miss you, Luthor. 2 of 6. I'm sad that I can't help you if you're in danger, Luthor. It's been rough for me. Scarlet has been ignoring me and it's been hard getting to know her. Not to mention she keeps the pocket watch closed a lot of the time. 4 of 6 I'll avoid the details, but it's been rough for me. 5 of 6. I've been curious. Sometimes, weeks could pass in your world, but only 24 hours pass for me. Why do you think that is, Luthor? 6 of 6. I'm good. I've been having a lot of fun learning more about Scarlet. I've been curious. Sometimes, weeks could pass. The script. I've been curious. I've been curious. Sometimes, weeks could pass in your world, but your counterpart, my counterpart has been curious, ellipsis. Do you know why sometimes weeks pass by in our world when only 24 hours pass by in my counterpart's world, Luthor? Description, Luthor said, oh really? So it seems like time could pass by differently in the human world than it does in Alincia. What is my counterpart talking about, Luthor? Description, Luthor said, I assume when time is passing in our world as we talk to your counterpart, time is also passing by in your counterpart's world. Description, Luthor said, the same goes for when the pocket watch is closed. But it seems like sometimes the time that passes by in both our worlds is not the equal. Description, Scarlet nodded slowly. Description, Luthor gave the pocket watch a squeeze. Description, Luthor looks excited. He said, this is certainly very interesting. Do you know why it happens? Description, Luthor shook his head. He said, I don't. Description, he said, maybe I'll. Description, Luthor stopped himself. Description, after a moment Luthor said, it doesn't matter what Alvin knows. Description, Luthor said, we are never going to talk again. Description, Scarlet swallowed hard. Her expression is apprehensive. Description, Scarlet took a deep breath. So in order for you to become a Timecrest again, Luthor, you have to beg this Alvin to go back to your timeline. Description, Scarlet swallowed hard. If you beg to go back to your timeline, then your parents will die and you will destroy Boulder. Description, Luthor said, yes. But if you don't go back to your timeline, then I'll stay a Timecrest. Description, Luthor looked down at his own reflection in the watch. He said, yes. I don't understand. Doesn't Alvin want you to join him? If he wants you to join him, then why is he stacking so many terrible obstacles in your way? Description, Luthor dug a nail into his palm. He said, that's what I asked him to. Description, Luthor shook his head and said, but Alvin says he knows me. He says he's certain that I'll choose to become a Timecrest again even knowing it will kill my parents and all the Voldorians.
Jeez.
Description, Scarlet's head is shaking. She muttered. That's crazy. Description, Luthor slammed his hand against the wall. Scarlet jumped a little in her seat. Description, Luthor said, Alvin doesn't know me at all. He doesn't know me.
We know in the first time when you go with Riley.
Description,
Yeah.
Scarlet hugged herself with her arms and shivered. Description, Luthor looked over at Scarlet and said, I can tell. Description, at the same time, Scarlet said, you can't. Description, both Luthor and Scarlet stopped talking. After a moment, Luthor said, you first, Scarlet. Oh, ellipsis, thanks. I was just going to say that you can't go back to your timeline, Luthor. Description, Luthor's eyes widened. He said, and I was going to say that I can tell you don't want to be a Timecrest, Scarlet. Description, he said, so if I don't go back to my timeline, you will probably stay Timecrest for the rest of your life and be connected to Alvin. I know and I don't want to be connected to Alvin. You're right, I don't want to be a Timecrest. And I don't know if Alvin's threats against you will come true or if he's just bluffing. But if there's even a chance that you'll kill all the Voldorians if you return to your timeline, then don't do it, Luthor. Please don't beg Alvin if there's a chance it could lead you to killing people. Description, Luthor turned towards Scarlet. Description, he said, why? If I return to my timeline, then you would be free from all of this. Description, Scarlet paused. Because you're not a killer, Luthor. And I don't want to. Description, Scarlet sighed. I don't want to be the one that turns you into a killer just because I don't want to be a Timecrest. Description, Luthor dug a nail into the palm of his free hand. So please tell me you're not thinking about returning to your timeline and taking your chances with Alvin.
Oof.
Description, Luthor looked out the window again. He said, I'm not. Description, Luthor looks apologetic as he said, I already made up my mind that I have to stay in this timeline. Description, Scarlet sighed in relief.
Wait. Where's Ash?
Description, Luthor said, I don't think there's a chance I'll kill the Voldorians even if I return to my timeline, but returning would mean killing my parents. Description, Luthor said, so I'm not going back. I have to stay and live out my life in this timeline, at least for now. Good. I think that's a really good idea, Luthor. Description, Luthor paused. He said, thank you, Scarlet. Description, Luthor looked down at the pocket watch. Description, he said, and I apologize to both of you. My decision affects all of us, but I didn't speak to either of you before making up my mind to stay in this timeline. Description, Scarlet nodded. I appreciate the apology, Luthor, but there's no need. Given what you could lose by returning to your timeline, it's very reasonable for you to just decide to stay here. I'm just sad that you lost 6 years of your life because of Alvin. Description, Luthor said, yeah, but now I know who he is and I'm not going to lose any more to him. System message, Scarlet, can you tell Luthor that I support his decision? Don't worry about me and just do what he thinks is right because he has so much at stake here. 1 of 3 respond. Yeah, I would have liked it if Luthor talked to me first before deciding to say nothing. Can you tell Luthor that I support his decision? Don't worry about me and just do what he thinks. Can you tell Luthor that I support his decision? Responded, can you tell Luthor? Description, Scarlet smiled. Luthor, my counterpart supports your decision and said you should do what you think is right. Description, Luthor looked down at the pocket watch. He gave it a squeeze and said, thank you. Description, Scarlet continued to hug herself. Luthor, I know you believe that the voice that I've been hearing is my counterpart's. And I know you told me that Alvin said he'll leave us alone in this timeline, ellipsis, but he could be lying. It makes me nervous that both my counterpart and Alvin share use of the watch. Description, Scarlet shivered. What if the voice I've been hearing, that we're talking to right now, is Alvin's? I'm not sure I'd be able to tell the difference. I don't know either of them after all. I'm afraid I might be leading us astray by telling you what the voice has been saying. Description, Luthor looked over at Scarlet and said, this is an awkward question, but did you die? Description, he said, it seemed like I had to die before Alvin could talk to me freely. That's why he wanted me to jump off the Sovereign Eye. Description, Scarlet bit her lip and gulped. I think, ellipsis, I did die recently. Description, Luthor arched his brow. He said, you're not sure if you did? Ellipsis, well, ellipsis, I overextended myself recently. When that happens, the aura in my body freezes and I have a 50/50 chance of surviving. I felt like I was dying, but when I woke up, my brother claims that his prayers to the first mage kept me alive. And that I didn't die. But, ellipsis, I think I died. And my counterpart brought me back to life. My counterpart told me that's what happened. Description, Luthor said, Scarlet, did you feel any pain when you died? Description, Scarlet trembled as she swallowed hard. Yeah, ellipsis, I did. I was consumed with pain. But as my body froze, I eventually went completely numb towards the end. Why do you ask, Luthor? Description, Luthor paused. He said, Alvin said he took away the pain I would have felt from dying. I was just wondering if he did the same for you. Wow, ellipsis. Alvin took away your pain? Description, Luthor said, yeah, I don't know why. Description, Scarlet bit down on her bottom lip. I don't think he took away my pain. Description, Luthor said, I see. I'm sorry you had to experience that. Yeah, but I'm happy to be alive. But since I died, it means I'm fully connected to Alvin now. So what if the voice in my head that I've been hearing is not just my counterpart? What if Alvin has already spoken to me?
Wait. That's why Ash is getting those red text messages, because Ash died in the... Oh no.
Description, Luthor said, have you heard a second voice in your head? I only heard one voice so far. But, description, Luthor said, that's good. When I spoke with Alvin, I recognized 2 distinct voices in my head. Okay, that's good. Anything else that distinguishes my counterpart from Alvin? Description, Luthor said, do you feel warm when you receive a message from your counterpart? I felt warm when I received a message from your counterpart, but not from Alvin. Description, Scarlet gulped. Her hands began to fidget and pick at her work overalls. You felt warm? Like, how warm? Description, Luthor said, it's hard to describe, but I felt a sense of warmth in my chest and... Description, Luthor said, and it almost felt like someone was actually with me, just invisible, but with me. I felt someone like a Description, Luthor said, and it almost felt like someone was actually with me, just invisible, but with me. I felt like I wasn't alone when I spoke with your counterpart. Someone like a stranger? Description, Luthor shook his head. He said, no, not a stranger. Okay, ellipsis. Description, Scarlet looks worried. Okay, well, I don't think we feel the same things when receiving messages from my counterpart. Do you think it's bad that I don't feel warm when I hear my counterpart's messages? Description, Luthor said, I'm not sure if it's bad. It's just different from me. Description, Luthor said, and maybe you'll start feeling the same things if you give it more time. Description, Scarlet nodded, still looking worried. Is there anything else to tell my counterpart apart from Alvin? Description, Luthor said, if only I could still see the watch glow, I could tell you if Alvin was here. The watch glows? Description, Luthor said, the watch glows blue for your counterpart and red for Alvin. Only Timecrest can see the glow. Description, Luthor looked down at the pocket watch, his expression sad. I only see a regular watch face now. I see a blue glow. Description, Luthor said, you do? Normally, I can perceive light, but when ellipsis, my counterpart speaks, I can perceive a soft blue glow in front of my eyes. Description, Scarlet spoke quickly, motioning her hand in circles in front of her eyes. She smiled. At least what I remember blue to be when I still had my sight. Does this happen to you, Luthor? Description, Luthor smiled and said, oh, interesting. I only see the blue glow coming from the watch. Description, Scarlet chuckled. I'm glad to finally know why I'm seeing blue. I should have suspected it had something to do with my counterpart. And I'm glad to report that I haven't seen any red. Description, Luthor said, that's good. I should, wallet, now, I should write this down. Blue is for my counterpart. Red is for Alvin. Description, Scarlet reached for where she put the empty name tags on the table, but there are none left. She gulped. Oh, no more name tags left. I'll just have to remember that blue is for my counterpart and red is for Alvin. Description, Luthor said, Alvin claims he won't bother you, your counterpart or me if I stay in this timeline. Do you really think Alvin will keep his word and leave us alone? Description, Luthor paused for a long moment. Description, Luthor said, yeah, I do. That's why I thought the voice in your head probably belonged to your counterpart. Description, Luthor said, of course, I don't know for sure that Alvin will keep his promise, but I believe he will. Description, Luthor looked angry for a moment before he said, he wants me to beg for him on my own. He'll ruin description.
Whoops.
Luthor looked angry for a moment before he said, he wants me to beg for him on my own. He'll ruin his own point if he interferes. Description, Luthor dug a nail into one hand. He said, Alvin's pride is the best guarantee we have for now. Description, Scarlet took a deep breath. I hope you're right, Luthor. And at least I know now that the blue glow is a good sign. Description, Scarlet cupped her cheeks with both hands. Oh, I didn't say thank you. My counterpart revived me and I didn't know what was happening at the time. And I thought my counterpart was just a voice in my head. But it's all starting to sink in now. If it hadn't been for my counterpart, I would probably be dead right now. Description, Luthor smiled and said, would you like to hold the watch, Scarlet? For a moment. Description, Luthor walked over and placed the watch in Scarlet's hand. Description, she held it carefully. Thank you so much for saving me. Description, Scarlet smiled and handed the pocket watch back to Luthor. System message, Scarlet is waiting. You're welcome, Scarlet. It was definitely my pleasure to be able to help. 1 of 5 Hey, Scarlet, I just want you to know that I've only said things to you so far. I can tell when Alvin's talking and if he ever tries to talk to you, I'll let you know. 2 of 5. After I revived Scarlet, the pocket watch glowed red briefly. 3 of 5 responses. After I revived Scarlet, the pocket watch glowed red briefly. 3 of 5 responses. Button.
I don't know if I...
Button.
Okay, hang on, let me...
New load settings.
Alright, I'm gonna
Button.
save this real quick.
Save/transfer. Save/close. Save/transfer. Close. Save game. The tech load. Save game.
Okay, there we go.
Save game. Save. Alerts. Okay. But okay. If music follow. New game. Continue. Continue. So you don't feel vertical. One. Say not vertical. So you don't feel warm when receiving messages from me, Scarlet? I'm disappointed to hear that. 4 of 5. After I revived Scarlet, the pocket watch glowed red briefly. After I revived Scarlet, the pocket watch glowed red briefly. Description, Scarlet gasped. Luthor, my counterpart said that after reviving me, the pocket watch glowed red. Description, Luthor said, did you see the red glow too, Scarlet? Description, Scarlet furrowed her brows. I don't know if I did. Maybe. I was Description, Luthor dug a nail into his palm. He said, did Alvin say anything? I don't think so. System message, I can confirm he didn't say anything. 1 of 1 responses. I can confirm. Monica responded. I can confirm. Description. Scarlet looks relieved. My counterpart confirms that Alvin didn't say anything. Description. Luthor fell silent. Scarlet looks tense. Description. After some silence, Luthor said, I bet he wanted to say something there, but it's good he seems to be keeping his word. What do you think he wanted to say? Description. Luthor said, maybe he just wanted your counterpart to know that he took notice. Well, that's unsettling. Description, Scarlet swallowed hard. My, counterpart, ellipsis, must be pretty powerful to turn me into a Timecrest. You said that. Description,
Whoops.
my, counterpart, ellipsis, must be pretty powerful to turn me into a Timecrest. You said that even Alvin was impressed. Description, Luthor said, yeah, Alvin made it clear that your counterpart is an exception. But I guess even your counterpart, ellipsis, I mean my counterpart can't undo what has been done and turn you back into the Timecrest. Otherwise, you would be a Timecrest right now instead of me. Description, Luthor's expression and tone was angry for a moment. Description, he took a deep breath and said more calmly, yeah, Alvin certainly acted like he was the only one that can undo this. Description, Luthor said, besides. Description, Luthor said, even if your counterpart could undo what has happened, I'm not sure what the side effects will be. Description, Scarlet gulped. You mean, ellipsis, your parents could still die? Description, Luthor dug a nail into his palm. He said, maybe. I figured Alvin intended to send me to the original past before your counterpart forced Alvin to take a detour which landed me in this timeline. Description, Luthor said, but I don't think it mattered to Alvin that I ended up in this timeline instead. Description, Luthor said, in fact, he seemed intrigued rather than disappointed in what your counterpart did. Description,
Interesting.
Scarlet cringed. You told me that you waited your whole life to talk to Alvin. I'm sorry he turned out to be such a horrible person. Description, Luthor said, yeah. System message, Scarlet is waiting. We'll get through this together. 1 of 5 response. I was there when Luthor spoke with Alvin. Alvin is a horrible person. 2 of 5. I'm actually looking forward to talking to Alvin again. 3 of 5. Alvin's not the only one that can turn Luthor back into a Timecrest. I have ways to, like playing again and making a different choice for example, but I want to stay in this timeline and see what happens. 4 of 5. I was there when Luthor spoke with Alvin. Alvin is a horrible person. We'll get through this together. 1 of 5 responses. We'll get through this together. 1 of 5 response. Description, Scarlet smiled. My counterpart said that we'll get through this together. Description, Luthor smiled too. He said, yes, together. Description, Luthor said, that's why I'm here today. Description, Luthor said, Description,
Whoops.
Luthor said, I actually knew you were working in the quarantine zone for a while now and I didn't come to see you right away, Scarlet. Description, Scarlet looks worried. Maybe you did feel a little resentment toward me. Description, Luthor said, that's not it at all. I didn't come to you because I didn't want to see the watch again. Description, Luthor said, when I woke up in this timeline in my 19-year-old body, I realized. Description, Luthor dug a nail into his palm. He said, I realized that Alvin just sees my life as something he can play with. Description, Luthor said, I wanted to distance myself from everything that is linked with Alvin, including you and your counterpart. I never wanted to be around the watch again. Why did you come back then, Luthor? You're not a Timecrest anymore. You're free from him. As long as you don't beg to join Alvin, then Alvin is supposed to leave all of us alone, ellipsis. Description, Luthor said, I'm back here because I realized if I run from Alvin now, he'll eventually end up winning. Description, Luthor said, even if Alvin keeps his word and leaves us alone, he's not going to give up on his plans. Description, Luthor said, Alvin can live forever. What if the next Timecrest after you decides to help Alvin with his plan of extracting First Mage Ezra from our world? Description, Scarlet gulped. Description, Luthor said, according to Alvin, First Mage Ezra is the life source of our world. Without him, Alincia would end. But why would Alvin just tell you that? If he wanted your help, isn't it just better to keep quiet that our world depends on the First Mage? Description, Luthor said, Alvin certainly seems to be working against himself. Description, he said, but I think Alvin told me about the importance of the First Mage for the same reason he told me that my parents would die and I would destroy Boulder if I joined him. Description, Luthor said, at the bottom of it all, Alvin seems to think that what he has to offer me is greater than all these losses. Description, Luthor said, he thinks I'll still help him despite everything that will be lost. Alvin has something to give you that's more valuable than the lives of everyone in this world? Description, Luthor said, it sounds absurd, doesn't it? I would have to be a completely different person to join Alvin. Did it even say what he's offering you, Luthor? Description, Luthor dug a nail into his palm. He said, Alvin's last words to me were, you're trapped and only I can set you free. Description, Luthor looked out the window at the walls of the quarantine zone. He said, I believe Alvin is offering me freedom in exchange for pretty much some of the worst things I could think of happening. Description, Scarlet touched her lips. She repeated, you're trapped and only I can set you free. Does he mean freedom from the quarantine zone? Description, Luthor said, who knows? All I know is I want to stop him because I fear he will actually destroy our world. But, ellipsis. But you said First Mage Ezra is still alive, right? He was the one who banished Alvin from our world, right? There's no way the First Mage would just let Alvin destroy our world if he's still alive, ellipsis. Right? Description, Luthor said, what worries me is that no one has seen First Mage Ezra for a long time so we don't know his current state of mind. Description, Luthor said, Alvin and the First Mage were friends. And a lot of time has passed since the First Mage banished Alvin. What if he is starting to forgive Alvin? Description, Scarlet gulped and furrowed her brows. You think First Mage Ezra might let Alvin back into our world? Description, Luthor said, all we know right now is that Alvin is alive and still has a hold over our world. Description, Luthor said, so either First Mage Ezra wasn't strong enough to get rid of Alvin completely, or worse, he never wanted to. Description, Scarlet shook her head and clutched her stomach with one hand. I don't know what to be shocked about anymore, when everything is so shocking. The First Mage is still alive out there, ellipsis. And he was friends with the first human, ellipsis. And the first human wants to take the First Mage from our world which will cause our world to end. And the fact that we're caught in the middle of this, ellipsis. Description, Scarlet continued to clutch her stomach. If the First Mage is alive, why do you think he's been hiding from everyone, Luthor? I'm grateful to him for the fire magic I'm using today. I'm sure lots of mages feel the same way. If he showed himself, I'm sure there would be tons of celebrations all around. Description, Luthor said, if Alvin is telling the truth, and First Mage Ezra is still out there, maybe he's hiding because he doesn't care about Alincia anymore. Description, Scarlet shook her head. Description, Luthor said, and if he doesn't care to save Alincia from Alvin anymore, who will protect Ash? Ash? Description, Luthor paused. He smiled and said, Ash is my sibling. Description, Scarlet nodded, seeming to remember something. Oh, right. Ash was just a baby during the Voldorian Mage trials. Description, Luthor's expression softened. He smiled and said, yeah, Ash is 6 years old now. Description, Scarlet...
Wait, whoa, 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 whoa. No. Oh, wait. Maybe that is right.
Smiled. After a moment her smile faded. I have a sibling I want to take care of too. Description, Luthor said, right, so I want to get rid of Alvin somehow before he achieves what he wants to. Shouldn't you close the pocket watch? Description, Luthor said, to shut out Alvin means shutting out your counterpart and I don't think that's the right thing to do. Description, Luthor said, I got a sense that your counterpart is one person Alvin can't control. Description, Luthor said, your counterpart took me to this timeline. It may not have derailed Alvin's plans, but it was something Alvin didn't expect to happen and that's a very good thing for us. What if my counterpart doesn't want to help us against Alvin?
Excuse me.
Description, Luthor said, I'm hoping your counterpart will... Description, Luthor said, your counterpart is still here after all, talking to us. Description, Luthor said, I'm here today because I want to ask for both you and your counterpart's help against Alvin. Description, Scarlet swallowed hard. She covered her mouth with her hands and breathed into her hands. Description, the room fell silent. Description, Luthor said, I debated for a long time whether or not to come here and tell you the truth, Scarlet. Description, Luthor said, if I had stayed away, what would you have done with the watch? Description, Scarlet cleared her throat. I might have taken it out to talk to the voice in my head from time to time, but probably not very often. Most likely I would store the watch away. Maybe even be able to forget that I had it unless it teleports to me. Description, Luthor said, I thought about letting the next Timecrest deal with this, Scarlet. Description, Luthor said, I didn't want to complicate your life. Description, Luthor said, but what if the... Description, Luthor said, but what if the next Timecrest doesn't want to fight Alvin? Description, Luthor said, what if the next counterpart doesn't have any surprising powers? Description, Luthor said, rather than take a chance on the next Timecrest and counterpart, I want to do something about Alvin myself. The world. Description, Luthor
Here we go.
said, rather than take a chance on the next Timecrest and counterpart, I want to do something about Alvin myself. The world. Description, Luthor said, and the people we care about are in danger as long as he is around. Description, Scarlet swallowed hard. How do we even fight someone like Alvin? Will he even be affected by our magic? Description, Luthor said, Alvin was affected by your counterpart's magic. He forgot his memories of the original past. Description, Luthor said, if your counterpart's powers continue to grow, then maybe your counterpart will be able to affect Alvin more. Description, Luthor said, and then there's First Mage Ezra. He was the one who managed to banish Alvin from Alincia. Description, Luthor said, maybe he'll know how to grow your counterpart's powers. Or maybe he already knows how to get rid of Alvin and just needs some more convincing. Description, Luthor said, it's clear to me that I need to find First Mage Ezra somehow. Description, Luthor said, the Masters of Alincia may know where he is or know something about Alvin too. Description, Luthor said, but I can't start searching for the First Mage or get an audience with the Masters Council if I'm stuck in here. So, first, I need to find a way to escape from the quarantine zone. Description, Scarlet licked her bottom lip. She nodded her head,
How?
an expression of apprehension on her face. Description, Scarlet took a deep breath. So, you're really serious about going against Alvin, Luthor? Luthor, maybe this is what Patora meant when she said this watch will lead me to unhappiness. Maybe if we both forget about the watch, everything will be okay. Description, Luthor said, Alvin won't stop unless someone stops him. I don't want to leave that up to someone else. I won't let him take First Mage Ezra away from our world. Description, Luthor said, I won't let him do whatever he likes with my life. Description, Scarlet nodded, looking fearful. Description, Luthor looked down at the pocket watch. Description, Luthor said, does your counterpart have anything to say? Yeah, ellipsis, sure. I'll let you know if my counterpart says anything. System message, Scarlet, I don't like the idea of leaving things to the next counterpart either. 1 of 5 responses. Button. Who knows how my powers will grow, Luthor? Who even knows what exactly happened between Ezra and Alvin? I'd like to wait and see what happens before picking any side. 2 of 5 responses. But I agree with Scarlet. Luthor, maybe it's best if you just let it go and live out your life in this timeline. Maybe it's best if we go our separate ways. 3 of 5 So, both you and Luthor end up working with Alvin in the future. 4 of 5 responses. Button. I don't like system mess. I don't like the idea of leaving things to the next counterpart either. 1 of 5 responses. Button. I don't like the idea of leaving things to the next counterpart either. 1 of 5 My counterpart doesn't want to leave things to the next counterpart either. Description, Luthor nodded. He said, let's go down this path together. Description, Scarlet took a deep breath and rubbed her legs. Luthor, you mind if I clean some armor? It helps me calm down. Description, Luthor said, yeah, sure, I don't mind. I'll just continue to keep a lookout for guards and your brother. Description: Luthor looked out the window as Scarlet rounded up all the notes on the table with her hands. She sighed as she felt the large number of notes underneath her hands. Thanks, Luthor. Thanks, Luthor. Description: Luthor said, thanks for hearing me out, Scarlet. Description: Scarlet pushed the notes to one side before walking over to the row of stained armor. Description: She brought back a piece of stained armor to the table and started cleaning, using her refined process. Description: After she finished rubbing liquid over the armor, Scarlet took out a towel from the pocket of her overalls and started scrubbing the armor. Description: She scrubbed and scrubbed with the towel, before she gasped, looking horrified. What am I doing? Description: Luthor looked over at Scarlet. I'm scrubbing the armor with a towel instead of the scouring pad. And I didn't even start the timer. Description: Scarlet shook her head and dropped the towel on the table. I don't know how I can help you, Luthor. Description: Luthor said, why do you say that, Scarlet? Description: Scarlet sat back down on her stool by the table. She clasped her hands together on her lap. You are Luthor Timecrest, the prodigy. Everyone in this quarantine zone knows your name. And my counterpart. I didn't even know humans could cast magic, and yet my counterpart revived me from the dead. Not to mention, my counterpart changed me into a Timecrest and altered the past just like that. Then there's First Mage Ezra, who gave our world magic. And Alvin, the first human, who can just send you to different timelines, Luthor. Who am I compared to everyone I just listed? I'm a girl from a small town that no one has heard of, who hasn't done anything noteworthy in my life. I can't even go on the same quests as my brother because I can't get myself promoted in my guild. Description: Scarlet's hands are shaking. Thanks for telling me everything, Luthor, but I don't think I can help you. I won't be able to protect anyone like usual. Description: Scarlet wiped her hands on her overalls before she wiped her face with her hands. Description: Luthor said, you already helped me today, by helping me speak with your counterpart. Description: Luthor said, and I'm stuck inside the quarantine zone for the time being. It would be extremely helpful to have someone like you, who knows the truth, that can go outside and gather information. Description: Luthor paused. He said, no, forget even that. It's just nice to have someone who knows the truth that I can talk to and bounce ideas off of, especially now when I can't hear your counterpart anymore. Description: Scarlet lowered her head. I'm not brave enough, Luthor. At least not as much as you are. Knowing what you know, you still came back for the watch. You still want to fight against Alvin. You know what my first thought was after you told me everything? I wanted to close the pocket watch and run away. I'm afraid that I'll say something wrong or do something wrong that would make my counterpart or Alvin angry with me. And I don't know if I'm being a good sister if I get myself mixed in with all of this. My brother is my top priority. Description: Luthor's expression softened. He said, now that you know the truth, I can go away if that's what you want, Scarlet. Description: Scarlet squeezed her hands together on her lap. Description: Luthor said, and if we don't see each other again after today. Description: Scarlet furrowed her brows. Description: Luthor said, I just want to say that I think you're brave and selfless. Description: Scarlet covered her mouth with one hand. You think, ellipsis, I'm brave and selfless? Description: Luthor said, the Valdorian mage trials that we fought in happened very recently for me, remember? Description: Scarlet gulped. Yeah, ellipsis. Description: Luthor smiled. He said, I remember clearly that you sacrificed everything to protect your brother. If it hadn't been for you, I'd have moved on to the finals instead of him. Maybe I had a moment, but that's because Sol is my brother and I would do anything for him. Description: Luthor said, maybe, but you also told me to stay in this timeline even though you don't want to be a Timecrest. Description: Luthor said, and I'm not your brother. You don't have any reason to help or protect me. If I return to my timeline, then you wouldn't have to deal with any of this. Description: Luthor paused. He said, I don't know why you were chosen to be a Timecrest. And I'm sorry for the trouble it brings you. Description: Luthor said, but after talking to you today, a part of me is glad it's you, Scarlet. Description: Scarlet's expression is a mix of emotions. She crossed her arms and shook her head. I wish it was bravery and selflessness that led me to tell you to stay in this timeline, Luthor. But it's guilt. Description: Scarlet paused. I don't want to kill people. But I have killed people, ellipsis, people that were trying to hurt my brother or got in his way. And I would kill again, but each life I've taken still haunts me. Description: Scarlet swallowed hard. I told you not to go back to your timeline because I don't want to pile on more guilt on myself. Description: Scarlet swallowed hard. Don't you see, Luthor? You're a better person than me. You're someone who can save the world. Not me. Description: Luthor said, you said you wanted to run away, but yet you're still here helping me to speak with your counterpart. Description: Luthor said, I don't think it's just guilt that makes you risk yourself. Description: Luthor said, I don't see that I'm a better person than you, Scarlet. Description: Luthor said, what I see are two people who have both made mistakes in the past, but still believe that we can do some good. I killed people, Luthor. I don't think you could have made a worse mistake than that. Description: Luthor took a deep breath. Description: Luthor said, I killed someone too. Description: Scarlet froze, a look of shock on her face. Did you just say, ellipsis, you, ellipsis, killed someone, Luthor? Description: Her voice sounded raspy. Description: Luthor said, his name is Lieutenant Zone Valsalri. He has a daughter named Zoe Valsalri who I met before the Valdorian trials. A Valdorian? How did it happen? Description: Luthor said, I was trying to come up with a cure for the Valdorian disease. The lieutenant first showed symptoms of the disease when he was inside this quarantine zone. Description: He said, since my father is seen as a leader of this community, the lieutenant was brought to our home until someone from Valdor could come to pick him up. Description: Luthor said, I took this chance to test my prototype cure on the lieutenant, but my cure had bad side effects which killed the lieutenant much earlier than the disease would have. I quickly took away any remaining life the lieutenant would have had to share with his daughter. Description: Luthor said, I'm not close to saving the world. I couldn't even save the man that I poisoned. Description: The room fell silent. System message: Scarlet, Luthor didn't test the cure on the lieutenant. His robot, Model 1, tested the prototype cure when Luthor told it not to. 1 of 4 respond. You risked your life to help out Mr. Barbello too. I saw that. You're brave, Scarlet, and you're part of the group. 2 of 4 responses. I'm not that powerful. Don't know about Alvin, but you don't need to worry about what you say around me at least. 3. You risked your life to help out Mr. Barbello too. I saw that. You're brave, Scarlet, and you're part of the group. 2 of 4 responses. But you risked your life to help out Mr. Barbello too. You risked your life to help out Mr. Respond. Description: Scarlet's eyes teared up. Description: She swallowed back her tears. My counterpart said something. Luthor. Description: Luthor eyed Scarlet. He said, It's okay. You don't have to tell me if the message is meant for you. Description: Scarlet paused. She nodded. Thank you, Luthor. Description: Scarlet paused.
Excuse me.
I died trying to help Mr. Barbello. I could barely even protect one person. Description: Luthor's expression softened, but he didn't say anything. Description: Scarlet wiped her face again with her hands. Luthor, I still think you're better than me though. It sounds like you killed the lieutenant by accident. All the people I killed were on purpose. Description: Luthor said, accident or not, a man is dead because of me. Description: Scarlet's expression softened. Description: Luthor saw Sol through the window in the distance. Description: Luthor said, Scarlet, I see your brother is walking back. Description: Scarlet looks panicked. She got up from her seat. Are you leaving, Luthor? Description: Luthor nodded and said, I should go. Unless you don't mind your brother seeing me here. Description: Scarlet cringed. And no, you should go. But are you coming back? Description: Luthor said, do you want me to? Description: Scarlet swallowed hard. I don't know, ellipsis. Description: Luthor took out a box much larger than the size of his pocket. He walked over to Scarlet and said, hold out your hand. Description: Scarlet held out her hand and Luthor placed the box onto her palm. Scarlet felt the box. Description: Luthor said, it's a letter box people use to mail things to each other. I have the other box that this one is connected to. Description: Luthor said, it'll only work inside the Voldor and quarantine zone because of the barrier, but I'd like to have the watch whenever you don't want to keep it with you. But letter boxes can only send paper and ink, right? Description: Luthor said, yes, but the pocket watch is indestructible. Description: Scarlet's expression showed that she realized this as Luthor said those words. Right. How could I forget? Were you carrying this box the whole time? Description: Luthor looked out the window. Sol is getting closer, but still a distance away. Description: Luthor said, no, my jacket pocket is lined with a special fabric I created that can store a few items much larger than it without inflating in size. Description: Scarlet looks odd. Oh, wow, Luthor. You made something like that? It sounds really useful. Description: Luthor said, my pocket can only store a few items, but I think I can get it to carry an infinite number of items if I worked on it. Description: Luthor said, but that's not on the top of my to-do list right now. Description: Scarlet paused as she held the letter box in one hand. She looks wistful. Description: Luthor said, will you send the watch to me, Scarlet? Of course. The watch belongs to you, so when it teleports back to me, I'll send it to you through the letter box whenever I have a shift inside the quarantine zone. Description: Luthor said, thanks, Scarlet. But I guess that means we never have to see each other again, right, Luthor? Description: Scarlet looks wistful. Description: Luthor took out another thing from his pocket. He said, I have something else for you. Description: Scarlet held out her hand once more. She felt Luthor place a small and smooth rectangle onto her palm. Description: Luthor said, it's the key to the elevator on the bottom floor of my home. If you use that key to access the elevator, I will know it's you. A key to your home? Description: Scarlet sounds shocked. Description: Luthor said, I meant what I said. You're always included if you want to be. Description: Luthor said, if you send me the watch through the letter box, I won't come by here again. You never have to talk to me if you don't want to. Description: Luthor said, but I'd like it if you would help me speak with your counterpart again. Description: Luthor said, I'd like it if you come visit me sometime, Scarlet. Description: Scarlet's cheeks turned pink. Description: Luthor said, Levidas Ultimus, like air. Description: He said, I hope I see you again, Scarlet. Description: Luthor turned into a gust of wind, lifting strands of Scarlet's hair as he flew out of the room. Description: Luthor blew past Sol as he neared the armor room. Sol looks confused as he felt the wind around him. Description: Luthor blew past Sol as he neared the armor room. Sol looks confused as he felt the wind around him. Description: Luthor traveled upwards, through the quarantine zone. People can be seen below, taking leisurely walks down the well-kept streets. He flew above all the buildings until he reached the roof of his own home. Description, Luthor transformed back from wind and looked down at the pocket watch in his hand. Description, he gazed down at his reflection. Description, Luthor said, I'm not sure if you're still there. Description, Luthor said, or maybe you preferred to have stayed with Scarlet. Description, he closed his eyes. System message, Scarlet is waiting. I'm glad to be with you, Luthor. It's just too bad you can't hear me anymore. 1 of 4 respond. Actually, I would have preferred to stay with Scarlet. Seems like your powers have grown stronger. I'm glad to be with you, Luthor. It's just too bad you can't hear me anymore. I'm glad to be with you, Luthor. Description, Luthor can't hear your message. Description, Luthor opened his eyes. He said, Description, Luthor shook his head. Description, Luthor opened his eyes. He said, I was hoping if I concentrated I could still sense you somehow. Description, Luthor shook his head. He said, I know I took you from Scarlet, but she's the Timecrest, so you'll return to her sooner or later. Description, Luthor smiled and said, I hope it's later. Description, Luthor paused. I actually did it. I told Scarlet everything. I even told her I killed someone. Description, Luthor shook his head. I hope I did the right thing. I hope I did the right thing. I hope I did the right thing. I hope she doesn't get hurt because of me. Description, Luthor took a deep breath. Description, he said, I want to show you what I've been working on. Description, Luthor placed the pocket watch in his jacket pocket. Description, he walked over to the elevator on the roof and entered it. Luthor exited on the 3rd floor. Description, he headed down the hallway to Lab 2 and went inside. Description, Helena clapped her hands together and said, Oh, good you're back. Description, Luthor backed away from her voice and said, Mom, what are you doing here? Description, Helena is sitting at one of Luthor's lab desks. She said, It's dinner time, Luthor, and I made your favorite. Description, she wiggled her fingers and said in a whimsical tone, Griffin egg sandwiches. Description, Luthor said, How long have you been waiting for me? Description, Helena said, Oh, for quite a while. But it's fine. I left instructions for your dad to keep the sandwiches warm. Description, Luthor said, Thanks for making dinner, but can you save my sandwich for later? I'm not hungry right now. Description, Helena's eyes grew large, almost teary. She said, Ash was asking for you. Where's my big brother? I'll eat when my big brother eats. Description, Helena sighed and said, I guess both my children will miss out on a healthy and nutritious dinner, ellipsis. Description, Luthor sighed and said, That's low, Mom. You know I don't do well with guilt. Description, Helena's expression softened. She walked up to her son, reached up and ran her hand through his hair. Description, she said, I know. I'm sorry for trying to guilt you, but I just want us to have a nice dinner together, okay? Description, Luthor sighed. He said, Yeah, okay. You win, Mom. Let's go eat. Description, Helena's eyes gleamed with joy as she wrapped her arm around one of Luthor's arms and eagerly pulled him out of the lab. Description, as she led both of them down the hallway to the elevator, Helena said, So what were you up to today that actually took you away from the lab? Description, Luthor said, You're not going to like it. Description, in a begging tone, Helena said, Oh, please tell me anyways, my dear. Anything that can get you out of the lab, I want to know about. Description, Luthor paused. He said, Sure, I'm going to tell you because then I need a favor from you, Mom. Description, Helena stopped in her tracks. She stepped in front of Luthor and rubbed her hands together with a gleeful expression. Description, Helena said, A favor from me? Do ask. I like it when you owe me, Luthor. Description, Luthor said, I went to see Scarlet. Description, Helena's hands dropped to her side. She said, Scarlet, ellipsis, and ellipsis, you mean there is a new Scarlet in town? Should we host a welcome party for her? I do like parties. Description, Helena's voice sounded nervous. Description, Luthor said, I went to see Scarlet Ignis, your ex-student. Description, in a high-pitched voice, Helena said, You went to see the girl who tried to kill you during the Voldorian Mage trials. Description, Luthor said, Mom, how many times do I have to say it? I chose to enter the Mage trials. I was the one who put myself in danger. Description, Luthor said, and the favor I need from you is to stop blaming Scarlet for my choices at night. Description, Helena covered her mouth and started pacing in front of Luthor. After a while, she stopped and grabbed onto her son's arms. Description, she looked up at him and said, I'm not angry at you, Luthor. I just want to know why you went to see her all of a sudden. Description, Helena trembled, her face straining of color. Description, Helena said, We've known she works in this quarantine zone for a while and when I asked you to stay away from her,
This is
you
a
didn't
very
seem to
long
mind.
one.
What has changed? Description,
Thank you.
Luthor eyed the spot on his jacket where the pocket watch is behind. He said, I changed my mind, Mom. Description, Luthor said, I always respected Scarlet for how hard she fought to protect her brother during the trials and I just wanted to see how she was doing. Description, Helena looks devastated. Luthor's expression softened. He said, Mom, I'm sorry to spring this on you, but you have nothing to worry about. Scarlet is a really nice person and it's not like she's still trying to kill me. Description, Helena swallowed hard. She trembled and said, Did you go to her because I never want to talk about that horrific night with you? Description, Helena looked up at her son, her eyes pleading. She said, I know it's selfish, but it's just hard for me to want to relive the night where you almost died in front of me, Luthor. Description, Helena said, But I'll do it. I'll talk about that night all you want if you stop seeing Scarlet. Description, Helena squeezed her hands together and said, I don't want you to be around a killer like her. Description, Luthor lowered his gaze. He took a deep breath and said, Mom, I've given an invitation to Scarlet to come visit me here. Description, Helena's mouth dropped open. She pointed at the ground and said, Here? You mean, our home? Description, Luthor looked his mom in the eye. He said, Mom, listen to me. I don't know if Scarlet is going to come over or not, but if she does, I need you to be nice. That's the favor I want to ask you. Description, Helena's eyes looked from side to side, searching for an answer. She said, Can you ask me something else? Anything else, Luthor? I just do not trust having her around you. Description, Luthor said, You once loved Scarlet, remember, Mom? And trust me when I say, she's a good person.
This is weird.
Description, Helena shook her head and looked up at the ceiling for a moment. She eyed her son and said, I trust what I saw in the trials. Description, Helena said, and what I saw was you tried to spare Scarlet and Sol and they tried to kill you. I have no more love to spare for her or her brother. Description, Helena covered her mouth, tears coming to her eyes. She shook her head and said, I can't forgive them. Description, Helena wiped her eyes and sighed. Description, she said, but you're still going to keep seeing her, aren't you, Luthor? Description, Luthor paused. He said, I will if she wants to see me. Description, Helena shook her head and said, so if I don't allow her inside my home, you'll just sneak off to see her? Description, Luthor nodded. Helena looks beat. Description, after a moment, Helena hugged Luthor and squeezed tightly. She said, okay, I'll do what you ask. I would rather you see Scarlet here, where I can keep an eye on her. Description, she said, and I'll be cordial to her if she comes over, but you owe me big time, Luthor. Description, Luthor said, thanks, Mom, and I'm sorry I hurt you by asking this of you. Description, Helena said, I want to call in that favor, Luthor. Description, Luthor bent away from his mom's embrace and said, already? What do you want me to do? Description, Helena let her son go and said, I know you were trying to keep Scarlet and Sol safe in the trials because of me, right? Description, Luthor said, that was part of it. You seemed to have cared for them a lot before. Description, Helena said, I knew it, Luthor. They were trying to kill you and you couldn't defend yourself properly because I was watching. Which means, ellipsis. Description, Helena looked away for a moment before saying, which means you almost died because of me. Description, Luthor said, no, Mom. Please don't think that. It wasn't your fault. I was the one who didn't want to kill anyone. Description, Helena said, it isn't Scarlet's fault. It isn't my fault. Well, Luthor, you're my baby so it's my fault and hers. Description, Helena said, so the favor I want from you is to remember that the next time if anyone tries to hurt you, please don't hold back because of me. Description, Luthor paused, before nodding. Description, Helena nodded too. She said, did Scarlet already accept your invitation to come over? Description, Luthor said, I offered, but I don't know if she will. Description, Helena looks a little relieved. She said, I hope she has better sense than to come over. Description, Luthor said, Mom, can I trust you to be nice? Description, Helena cleared her throat and said, oh of course. Sorry. I just need to vent some of these feelings. I'll get it all out with your dad. Woo, he's not sleeping tonight. Description, Luthor said, you can vent with me. Description, Helena shook one finger into the air. She said, no, I can say some of the things I want to say around you, Luthor. Description, she motioned with one hand and said, come on, let's not keep your dad and Ash waiting. Description, Helena put one hand under her nose, covering her mouth, and walked ahead of Luthor to the elevator. Description, Luthor followed his mom into the elevator and they exited one floor below into a spacious greeting room. The greeting room is decorated for a party. Description, Luthor and his mom walked through the greeting room, up a few steps, and turned a corner to enter the dining room. Description, Julius is sitting with Ash on his lap at the dining room table. There is a large, heated platter holding a stack of sandwiches in the middle of the table. A plate of mixed vegetables is beside sandwich platter. Description, Julius smiled at his wife and son. He tilted his head, a curious expression spreading across his face, as he saw his wife's eyes were a little red. Description, Ash jumped out of Julius' lap and said, yay, brother. Description, Ash ran over to Luthor and hugged Luthor's leg. Luthor looked down and ruffled Ash's hair. Ash's stomach growled loudly. Description, Luthor said, are you hungry, Ash? Do you want to eat? Description, Ash said, not yet. I want to show you what I got today, brother. Description, Ash pulled out something and held it out to Luthor. Description, Helena sat down next to Julius. He leaned over and mouthed, is everything okay? Description, Helena looked at her children and smiled. She nodded and mouthed, I'll tell you later. Description, Luthor looked at the item in Ash's hand. He said, is that an eraser? Description, Ash looked shocked and pleased that Luthor guessed it so quickly. Ash giggled and said, yeah, it is an eraser. It can make things we write go away in case we make a mistake. Description, Ash said, and it's shaped like some sort of animal, ellipsis, moof, muffs or something. Description, Helena leaned her head on Julius's shoulder. The parents both looked so happy. Description, Luthor smiled, looking happy as well. He said, you mean muffies, Ash? Description, Ash said, yeah, muffies, are they real, brother? Description, Luthor said, yeah, muffies are real. Description, Ash said, can we go see one? Description, Luthor paused. He said, I'm afraid there are no muffies inside the quarantine zone, but there's plenty of them outside the wall, Ash. Description, Ash's shoulders slumped as Ash said, outside the wall? Do you think we'll be able to go outside the wall one day? Description, Luthor patted Ash on the head and said, yeah, Dad is working so all of us can go outside the wall someday. Description, Ash immediately cheered up and waved back at Julius. Ash said, yay, keep up the good work, Dad. Description, Julius laughed and said, thanks, Ash. I will. Description, Luthor said, where did you get the eraser from, Ash? Description, Ash said, one of my friends had erasers and I got to pick one. There were so many colors to choose from, but I picked blue. Description, Luthor looked at the blue muffy eraser in Ash's hand. Luthor said, why did you pick this one, Ash? Description, Ash said, blue is your favorite color and I wanted to give you a present, brother. Description, Ash held the eraser out to Luthor proudly, with a toothy grin. Description, Luthor smiled and said, if it's a gift from your friend, wouldn't you like to keep it, Ash? Description, with a shake of the head, Ash said, I want you to have it because you're the best big brother in the whole world. Description, Luthor continued to smile as he took the eraser from Ash. He put the eraser in his pocket and said, thanks for the gift, Ash. I love it. Description, Ash looked so pleased. Description, Luthor said, shall we eat? Description, Ash said, yeah, I'm hungry. Description, Luthor helped Ash settle down at the table. He took a seat next to Ash, across the table from their parents. Description, Luthor placed a sandwich on Ash's plate before helping himself. Julius leaned over and placed some mixed vegetables on Ash's plate before passing the plate around the table. Description, Ash picked up a fork and started to pick up a green vegetable, but saw Luthor picking up his sandwich. Ash dropped the fork with the vegetable and picked up the sandwich. Description, 2 slices of golden toast bread sandwich to Griffin egg scramble, giving off a savory and buttery smell. Description, Luthor took a bite of the sandwich. Ash took a bite of the sandwich. Description, Luthor felt the yolk from the Griffin egg in the sandwich break apart between his teeth. His mouth filled with the rich and creamy texture of the egg. Description, Luthor said, Mom, this is really good. Description, Ash said, Mom, this is really good. Description, Helena grinned and said, let's all remember that your mom is good at a lot of things. Description, Julius is working his way quickly through his sandwich. He said, I couldn't agree more, dear. Description, Ash is staring at Luthor with big, bright violet eyes. Description, Luthor took another bite of his sandwich. Ash took another bite. Description, Helena took a bite into her sandwich. She said, I'm good. I'll definitely make more for the party. Description, Helena said, I hope to warm at least a few Valdorian hearts by the end of the night with these. Description, Julius said, thank you for all the preparation you have been doing for this party.
I think
dear.
Ash and Luthor have a
Helena looked
little
excited and said,
have a bondage
there's still
there.
so much I want
They
to
do
in the
everything
next few
together.
days to make sure everything is perfect. Description, Julius smiled before he looked over at Luthor and said, your friend, Oliver, is coming to the party, Luthor. Description, Helena said, you like Oliver, right? So you'll be at the party, right, Luthor? Description, Luthor said, yeah, sure. I look forward to seeing him again. Description, Helena pursed her lips and said, are the elder cranes coming? Description, Julius sighed and said, no, Oliver's parents declined our invitation. I suppose Oliver is coming against their will. Description, Helena sighed and said, too bad. The elder cranes are going to miss out on some good food and hospitality. Description, Luthor said, who did you get to watch Ash during the party, Mom? Description, Ash looked at Luthor with big, bright eyes. Description, Helena said, the Roberts. They have a child around the same age as Ash, so it'll be a nice play date. Description, Luthor lowered his gaze. Description, Helena smiled at Ash and said, Ash, make sure you be good for Mommy, my sweet baby. Description, Ash said, can brother watch me instead? Description, Luthor glanced at Ash. Luthor's expression is a mix of emotions. Description, Helena said, no, Ash, your brother will be with Mommy and Daddy. Description, Ash looks gloomy. Description, Helena said, but if you behave at the Roberts, Ash, your brother will put you to bed afterwards. Description, Helena mouthed please to Luthor from across the table. Description, Luthor smiled and looked over at Ash. He said, I can read you a bedtime story afterwards. Description, Ash immediately looks delighted. Ash said, really? Any story I want? Description, Luthor said, yeah, any story you want. Description, Ash said, yay, I want a story about Muffies. Description, the family continued to eat. Julius said, all the paperwork to change us back to Reeds have been finalized. Description, Helena smiled and said, oh, good. Description, she nodded and said, good, that's done now. Description, Helena took another bite of her sandwich, chewing and swallowing. She looked nervously at Luthor. Description, Helena said, Luthor, I just wanted to make sure again that it was really okay for us to change our last names back. Description, she said, since you haven't mentioned the watch or chronos in a long time, I just figured you were over your Timecrest phase, ellipsis. Description, Helena placed one hand on the back of her neck and said, and, the Timecrest name kind of has some bad memories associated to it for me. Description, in a calm tone, Luthor said, I'm happy to be a Reed again, Mom. Description, relief washed over Helena. She smiled and said, okay, then. Description, she looks giddy as she said, the Reeds are back. Description, Luthor finished eating his sandwich. He picked up his fork and started picking at his vegetables. Description, a look of dilemma crossed Ash's face. Ash had taken the same number of bites as Luthor, but the bites were smaller so Ash's sandwich is still unfinished. Description, Ash looked from the sandwich to the vegetables. After a thoughtful moment, Ash dropped the sandwich and moved on to the vegetables to keep pace with Luthor. Description, Luthor said, hey, Dad, how are our talks with Janice going? Description, Julius said,
This is a long one.
King Janice allowed us to host that party tomorrow, so I might be finally wearing him down. Description, Julius said, and the party will be a good chance to connect with some Valdorians and other guests from the outside and rally them to our side. Description, Luthor shook his head and said, I still think the Valdorians who come are approved by Janice to come. or even worse, ordered to come. Janus is putting on a show for us like usual. Description, Julius and Helena gave each other a look. Description, Julius wiped his mouth on his napkin. He said, I'm aware that could be the case, but this party is still a step up from the relationship we have with Valdorians right now. Description, Julius said, I want Valdorians and humans to talk to each other, so I'm hoping this party is going to push us in that direction. Description, Luthor said, Dad, we've been talking to the Valdorians for years now and nothing has really changed. Description, Ash looks confused, but is nodding as Luthor spoke. Description, Julius put down his fork and laced his fingers together. He said, I know you're frustrated that we're still inside the quarantine zone, son. Description, Julius said, but King Janus did allow us to host this party, so that's progress. Description, Julius said, it's slow, but we have to trust that if we continue to negotiate with the Valdorians, we'll get what we want peacefully. Description, Luthor said, Dad, I know you think negotiations with Janus will lead to our freedom. I know you're doing the best you can. Description, Luthor said, but I think no amount of talk will ever change Janus' mind about humans. Description, Julius looks crestfallen. Description, Julius looked his son in the eye and said, I'm sorry you feel that way, Luthor. But if we stop talking to King Janus, we have nothing. We are just prisoners of Boulder. Description, Luthor sighed as he looked down at his own plate. Description, there was a loud clatter as Ash dropped the fork. Description, Luthor looked over. Ash is wincing and rubbing the hand with the scar. Description, Luthor looks distressed. He said, is your scar hurting, Ash? Description, Ash is shaking with a pained expression, but seemed to recognize Luthor's distress. Ash said, brother. I'm okay. Description, Julius looks concerned as Helena rushed over. She placed Ash on her lap and said, Mom will kiss away the pain, okay, Ash? Description, she took Ash's scarred hand into hers and brought it up to her lips. She kissed the scar. Description, Luthor dug a nail into his palm as tears welled up in Ash's eyes. System message, the pocket watch is teleporting. Description, the pocket watch clicked open. Description, Scarlet heard your message, I'm glad to be with you, Luthor. It's just too bad you can't hear me anymore. Description, the message felt faded. Description, Scarlet looked nervous as she heard it. She closed the pocket watch. System message, connection lost. Description, the pocket watch clicked open.
Wow.
Description, Scarlet is standing in the kitchen of her home. The savory smell of spices filled the air. The kitchen window is open, letting the cool night air mix in with the warmth inside. Description, outside the window, a shared courtyard can be seen surrounded by buildings with multiple floors of living space. Description, the outside walls of the quarantine zone is in the distance. Description, Scarlet held the watch in her hand, her expression uncertain. Description, Sol is sitting at a simple dining table for two near the kitchen. He had his feet up on the table. Description, he looked at Scarlet's back as she stood at the stove and said, make the noodles extra spicy tonight, Scar. Description, Scarlet nodded at her brother's voice. Are you sure, brother? Extra spicy always gives you a tummy ache after. Description, Sol said, just do it, Scar. I want to feel like I've been kicked in the stomach. Description, Sol leaned back in his chair. With his hands clasped behind his head, he looked up at the ceiling. Oh okay, I'll make it extra spicy. Description, Scarlet had her thumb on the lid of the watch. She closed the watch. System message, connection lost. Description, Scarlet took a deep breath and set the watch aside as she tasted the sauce on the wooden spoon she was using to stir the noodles. Description, after tasting it, she put in 3 more pinches of spices from a jar sitting next to the stove. She tasted it again and followed up with 3 more pinches of spices. Description, Scarlet tasted it again, and made a face. She nodded and didn't add more spices in. Description, Scarlet reached out for the watch. She picked it up and whispered. So, ellipsis, I'm home, ellipsis, up, my work home provided by the older, ellipsis. Description, Scarlet seems uncomfortable and nervous as she spoke to the watch. Up, ellipsis, were you with Luthor just now? I couldn't find the watch after he left. System message, Scarlet is yeah, I was with Luthor until the watch teleported back to you just now. Glad you opened the watch. Thanks for letting me in. 1 of 3 Luthor said nice things about you to his mom. He said you are a good person and he respected you for how hard you fought. 2 of Luthor's mom is still really upset with you for trying to kill Luthor during the Valdorian mage trials. 3 of 3 yeah, I was with Luthor until the watch teleported back to you just now. Yeah, I was with Luthor until the watch teleported back to you just now. Glad you opened the watch. Thanks for letting me.
You have reached the ending of Part 3 in Chapter 13 of Timecrest 3. Please continue to Part 4.
So that's it for today's video. If you guys have any more questions, please put them down in the comments below, or you may send them to info@TheTechPianoPlayerKid.com. You can also give me a text at 913-312-1325, and if you do not live in the United States, you can text me through WhatsApp and give me a call there as well. I also have a toll-free number that you can use to give me a call at 877-318-8775. Please also follow me and like my Facebook page, The Tech Piano Player Kid, and follow me on Twitter, tech_piano. And you can also join my discussion forum on my website where you can ask questions about technology and help to answer questions about technology for the blind and stuff like this by going to TheTechPianoPlayerKid.com and clicking on the discussion board page underneath the navigation bar menu where you can register for a free account and help to answer questions and ask questions if need to be. Please make sure that you get permission from your parents if you still need to do so before making an account. just to make sure that you're on the safe side and that you don't want to get in trouble because we don't want that to happen. And you can also subscribe to my monthly newsletter if you wish by going to my website, TheTechPianoPlayerKid.com. Again, if need to be, get permission from your parents just to be on the safe side. And you can unsubscribe at any time if you wish. And if you have any trouble with unsubscribing or creating an account or deleting your account, please let me know and I will do my best to help you out. Anyway, that's it for today's video. God bless you all and peace. The Tech Piano Player Kid is out.
Thank you for watching today's video. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications and leave a comment down below. For questions, please send an email to info@TheTechPianoPlayerKid.com. You can also give a call or text at 913-312-1325. And don't forget to like my Facebook page, The Tech Piano Player Kid, and follow me on Twitter, Tech_Piano. Black background with white text that reads The Tech Piano Player Kid displays on the screen with the same text written to the right in Braille, then fades to black.